that's what the EEOC found. But here's where I really gasped when I read the article, is that applicants and witnesses reported that they were told point blank that the company did not hire women for loader positions. I can't even imagine.
Are you a team manager struggling to lead your team well? Have you been asked to lead HR, but it's your first time? Or are you an HR pro looking for your tribe? While We Were Working is the show for you. With quick tips and tough topics in 30 minutes or less, the Jumpstart HR team is here for you. So let's get into it. Hey, what's going on? Thank you for tuning into this week's episode of While We Were Working. While We Were Working is the show that helps you become a better leader of your small business or your small team. As always, it's brought to you by the crew here at Jumpstart HR. I'm Joey Price, President and CEO, and I'm joined with our awesome co-host, Sommer Keytron, who is our consulting practice manager here. Sommer, what's new with you?
Oh man, Joey, really thrilled to be back on this week. And gosh, it's so crazy how fast time flies by. I cannot believe it's the middle of May. Before you know it, it's going to be June. And then, um, gosh, it always boggles my mind how fast time goes by. Do you have
Yeah.
any plans for the summer?
Yeah, we're actually going to do a road trip, and I am nervous because we're going to go to Tennessee from Maryland, which is about a 10-hour drive if you do it straight. But, we got a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, so we're going to break that up. But it'll be our first sort of, not our first family road trip. That would be false, but it'll be a nice, fun family road trip for us to do and make some new memories together. Hopefully, my wife and I don't get too crazy being in the car with littles, but it should be fun. Should be a fun time.
It will be great. Lots of snacks, stops, and games. You'll be
Yes,
you'll be fine.
I like that. I like that idea. Emphasis on the snacks and
Snacks.
for
That's a
sure.
very important part of road trips is you must have the snacks. Otherwise, it doesn't count.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. So this week we are. Wait, no. What are you doing this summer? Summer.
I don't have any plans yet. I'll probably start thinking about, what's going on over here in California. Our ski resorts just closed last weekend. So I'm still in winter mode.
hmm
Kind of just I think it's going to be a very short spring. So maybe I'll have more updates for you on a later episode, but nothing planned as of yet.
Okay. Sounds good. Summer's gonna tune in from one show, and she's gonna, be in the middle of like an African safari or something, and we'll still be doing our show. But yeah, it's good to check in from time to time. I know we kind of jump into things, but always good to kind of reset and share with our audience what's going on in our world. So, yeah, fun updates. And this week we've got two really great topics to share. One in our While We Were Working segment. We are going to talk about the EEOC and a company that has to pay out on sex discrimination. You will be surprised at the huge dollar amount that they have to pay out for sex discrimination. We don't want that to be your business, so we're going to unpack some things that can help you stay out of the EEOC bad graces.
This one's a biggie. This one actually comes from the EEOC. And there was a trucking company called R&L Carriers, and they are a nationwide trucking company headquartered in Ohio. And they were just fined $1.25 million to a class of female applicants who were discriminated against in their hiring processes. And this is a biggie because I think companies may not necessarily be aware that their practices are against the law. And every now and then, something like this comes along just as a reminder that the EEOC's out there. They're listening, they're watching, they're receiving those complaints. And if your practices uh, aren't following the law, you may be the next company on their headlines with a very stiff fine.
Yeah. In summer, it's not just the practices, but it's also the patterns too. I know we'll get into that, but uh, even if you have practices that seem legit to you, if you take a 30,000 foot view of the patterns that result from the actions that you take or a manager on your team takes or that your organization takes collectively, then you might be in trouble. So let's go ahead and talk through some of this. I guess one thing I'll say is I'll just kind of jump in first, excuse me. Is as we look to have more of an inclusive society, right? There's going to be opportunities for people to pursue roles and careers where doors may have been closed before. And so, as we think and reimagine the workplace of the future, we've got to think about, do our practices hinder people from pursuing jobs because of a protected class or protected status? So I'll just give like a 30,000 foot view of that. But what are some of the things that stood out to you in the article?
Well, there were quite a few. I mean, when I read things like this as an HR pro and, just advocate for being inclusive and, trying to help businesses develop the best DEIB strategy, it's sad, but it's alarming. One of the things in the article that really stood out to me was that this occurred over a long period of time before
Hmm.
it actually got to this point. So to summarize, some of how they got there was that uh, women were discriminated against in hiring for loader positions. Again, this is a trucking company, so loading the trucks, and this was all the way between 2010 and 2017. And although there were a few women who were hired, most female applicants were actually rejected or steered to different positions simply because they were female. And that's what the EEOC found. But here's where I think I really gasped when I read the article, is that applicants and witnesses reported that they were told point blank that the company did not hire women for loader positions. I can't even imagine.
I can't either.
I mean, I have so many questions, right? Like, do they have an HR department? Like, where was HR? Like, who thought this was okay? So many questions, but I think it brings us back to what we've talked about before, Joey, and that is the importance of one, training
Hmm.
everybody who's involved in the hiring and interviewing process and making sure that they're aware of what they can and can't say. But it's also not assuming that just because somebody has worked in a leadership role that they have received training or even guidance on interviewing.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, to think about that this happened over a 7 to 8 year period, it tells me that it was a massive problem, but it also doesn't talk about whether they knew that they were doing wrong and did it anyhow.
Yeah, and that's the big thing. You asked, well, where was HR? And I suspect that they may have an HR department, but the way they're utilizing their HR team, they're probably underutilizing their team. They're probably relying on HR. And, I don't know the company, so I can't say, for certain. But what it appears is a situation that you want to avoid where you are asking HR to set you up with the tools, maybe a job description or interview questions, but you're not having ongoing conversations with HR and inviting them into the hiring process. Because I would imagine that if you are inviting the right HR pros into the room, the right recruiters into the room, they're going to say, hey, you can't say this, you can't say that, or maybe we should reevaluate that candidate because why you rejected them, isn't on unlawful grounds. And I'm wondering if there was a silo or some walls built up between HR and these hiring managers or hiring decision makers, because for it to have lasted as long as it did, um, I can't imagine HR or recruiting having a significant voice in those processes.
Yes, I think it raises a lot of, a lot of thoughts on how we can do better. And one of the things that comes to mind is ensuring that we're looking at our hiring and our processes from an analytical standpoint, that we're looking at the demographics and asking ourselves, can we do better? And that's not just for gender, right? It's for so many other factors that are sometimes unconsciously part of the decision making that, quite frankly, is against the law. But unless somebody is owning looking at the data and identifying where there are some potential areas of concern, it is possible that there are uh, unlawful decisions being made. And if nobody's looking at the data, may not be keen or aware that it's even happening. So I think there's a couple of things to consider in these types of situations, but you have to look at the data. And in this case, I can't imagine that if they looked at it, assuming that, you know, perhaps somebody or nobody knew that this was, really clearly happening who could do something about it. If they looked at the data, I bet they would see that there was a disproportionate number of females who were applying for this role and not being hired for it. And for me, that would beg a question.
Yeah, and Summer, it's one thing to see the data. It's another step forward to understand what the data means and how to do something good about it. And so being able to look at hiring trends and tracking the percentage of applicants who apply that are male, percentage of applicants who apply that are female, whatever the case may be, and then tracking that against the people who are ultimately hired, and how do the ratio of those who identify their gender, how does that align with the ratio of who's ultimately hired? If there's a lot of variance there, then that's a question that you have to ask and say, are we, turning away great candidates just because they're not the person that we think should be in the role, even if they can do the role?
That's right. And I think there's a lot to take away from this, but it's also to recognize that your reputation as an employer is really at stake because, when you think about this being in the news and it's all over, you don't want your name attached to it because your current employees are going to feel a little uneasy because they're going to be asking, well, what other poor decisions has my employer made? But hiring future employees, they too will question whether they're going to have a fair opportunity within your organization. So know that doing the right thing means everybody wins. And that is really just taking a look at your processes and ensuring that they are inclusive, and that if you find, like you said, you find that there's a problem, that you do something about it.
Okay, so, we're not going to solve all of the world's problems just in this pod alone, but I think we can consider this one solved. Have really smart people taking a look at the data. But even before you get into that, make sure that your hiring practices don't lead to patterns of discrimination or practices of discrimination, because the four-letter agency EEOC will come a knocking, and it ain't cheap. It ain't cheap. Okay. Speaking of not being cheap, let's go and jump into our Consultants Corner. And Consultants Corner is our view of the good, bad, and ugly from the trenches of life as an HR consultant. We're doing this new thing with the show where we are introducing song lyrics written by ChatGPT that addresses the Consultants Corner question of the day, written in the style of a particular artist. So this week, we are going to have a song that is in the style of Taylor Swift. She's doing this big tour. I had a keynote for Paycor and incorporated this fun theme into the talk. So let's just go ahead and get down to it and can see if you can guess what the topic is. All right, so we won't do the whole song, but I'll start with a bridge. I'll start with the pre-chorus actually. They ignored retirement plans, shrugged off paid leaves, didn't know these are things that an employee perceives, thought only startups in Silicon Valley could afford such benefits in their alley. Small business blues, lessons to learn, mistakes made, tables to turn. Compensation's not just the money you earn, it's about the whole package for which we yearn. That's pretty good. That's pretty good.
That is pretty good. I'm waiting until the episode that you bust out your guitar, and then we have song lyrics and a little bit of background music to go with it.
You know what, Summer? If we get a naming rights sponsor for the show, maybe I'll whip out my guitar and sing along to these songs and play along. But either way, this is fun. This is fun. It's a good way to bridge the divide or bridge a couple worlds of music and tech and HR. So let us know if you like these and if you have some artists that you'd like us to create songs in their style. But let's go ahead and jump into this topic, which is comp and benefits. What are some of the most common mistakes that we see businesses making in this arena?
Well, we only have time for a few, and we'd love to share them all. But I think the first one I would pick is seeing companies who do offer a stipend or reimbursement, some sort of amount on their team members' paycheck, which is intended for helping them pay for whatever medical insurance that it is they want to buy. And on the surface, that sounds really awesome. But unfortunately, dun dun dun, the good old IRS says you really can't do it that way. So the takeaway here is that if you are reimbursing your team members on a tax-free basis for medical, you actually have to have some sort of plan established. There's a couple of different ways you can go about it. We won't cover today, but just know that if you're doing it on a tax-free basis, there's some other things IRS says you have to do. But if you wanted to just give them an additional amount and tax it, you totally can. But just know that that's very different than giving a pre-tax amount. That's a pretty common issue.
Wow. So you mean to tell me the IRS tells me as a small business not only to pay my workers, but how to pay my workers? Is that
Uh,
what you're saying, Summer?
they do. They pretty much tell you how to live your life, Joey. No, just kidding. Yes, the IRS cares about anything that has to do with taxes, right? And so in this case, if it's a reimbursement, it's money that's not being taxed. So they absolutely do care about that.
Yeah, and we see businesses get into this issue if they're attempting payroll and benefits solo, even if they're attempting it with an accountant or a bookkeeper, who may be running their QuickBooks or what have you. If they don't know payroll, um, just because you're good at numbers doesn't mean you're good at payroll. Just because you're good at P&Ls and budgets and profit and loss doesn't mean you know the ins and outs of payroll accounting. And so um, this is a really big one that thinking about how to reconcile that could be a nightmare if it's a long standing thing that you've been doing. So definitely go into that. If you see that you're getting reimbursement from your employer and you don't have an IRS compliant plan set up, you might want to reach out to us and see if we can come help your business. Or if you're a business owner and you're like, I don't know if we're compliant, well, we're able to help you. So we offer payroll solutions that can help you get all of that up to speed. What's another comp and benefits thing that we see out in the wild, Summer?
I like how you say out in the wild. I think closely related to what we were just talking about when it comes to benefits and taxation. This one, I get uh, really the look of shock and surprise, and that is domestic partners on plans and knowing that you actually have to set those up very specifically from a payroll and tax perspective in order to be compliant. So it really just is a testament to what you were just saying, Joey. This is super common that companies aren't aware, and that's because if you think about the laws, we've got some states who say, yes, you can have a domestic partner treated as a spouse, but then you have federal law who in you have federal law that doesn't recognize that. So essentially you have this conflict in taxes. And so in short, the way that you remedy it, and there's a couple of different ways that you can do the calculations. If your employees are making a pre-tax contribution, then you have to actually carve out the part of that premium that is for that domestic partner. And that is because, again, we're talking about taxes. So if they're not recognized as a spouse, they can't have that pre tax benefit. So you have to carve it out and essentially break up that deduction into part of it being pre tax for the employee and the other portion that is for the dependent on a post tax basis. And that way you'll make the IRS happy.
Summer, I'm so glad you're on our team because that's an area that I don't know as much as you, and there are many of those areas in our world. But just to know that you're on top of stuff like that for our clients is a huge benefit because I mean let's make it practical and plain, right? So the economy that we've been in for quite some time, it's been tough on a lot of people, and so I don't know the numbers or statistics or the trends, but I'd imagine that if there are couples who may have been dating, maybe they've moved in together and they are partners, or whatever the case may be. And so there's a rise of, oh yeah, my spouse, my partner, my person, our plan offers this aspect. Great, I love it. Let's sign up together. That's one medical insurance bill, one dental insurance bill, one vision bill, right? Great.
Yeah.
But as the employer, there's the responsibility on our end, Summer, that you've just mentioned. And so to help prevent, a tax hiccup come tax time. Super, super important to get this right.
It is, and it's again, it's one of those really common areas that a lot of businesses, even mid-size, don't really know. So, hopefully, if this sounds like something that might apply to your business, you can reach out and we'll help you get it all straight. There's something we've talked about before. I will never stop talking about it because it is so problematic, and that is the misclassification of independent contractors. And that's not uncommon. You have small businesses who start out, they simply don't know the laws like we do. They heard from a friend, we'll just hire them as a contractor and you just pay them. You don't have to worry about anything else. And Joey, I mean, I think we hear this almost every week from a client or a prospect.
Hmm.
It's so common, and we help them get it straight. But I mean, how many times have you heard that come up in conversations with prospects or clients over the years?
I've heard it from clients. I've heard it from prospects. I've heard it out in the wild on places like social media where people are talking about running business. It's a hiccup that people um, miscalculate or make missteps on because
Yeah.
they don't know things like the federal test of whether or not someone's an independent contractor or not. And then, a state that you would know better than I do, but even in California, right? What are the rights and allowances that an independent contractor has that you may think are only reserved for an employee? And so you've got to know if someone is a independent contractor and can you justify that? Not even just kind of can you justify it because you want to put a circle into a square peg, but it's really if the government were to knock on your door and say, hey, can you explain the duties of this person and how they're an independent contractor? And oh, you tell them how to do this and they have to come to you for approval for this or so there's a lot to determining if someone's an independent contractor or not. And it's not just, oh, it's easier to pay them as a contractor.
It's a super sticky area, and I think you've mentioned some of the key takeaways here, which is to understand that there's a federal test. Some states have their own tests. And something that's come up much more recently is that countries have their own tests. So, kind of a bonus on the same question is, oh, my team member is moving, to, we'll just say like Germany or some other international destination. We're going to take them off payroll. We're just going to pay them as a contractor. And it's like, okay, red flag time, because just because they're international doesn't relieve you of your obligations. Very similar to states, countries have their own criteria. So unless you're going to go out and understand that country specific contractor criteria, I would hesitate before hiring them in the same capacity that they were working as an employee.
Absolutely. And one of the fastest growing areas of the payroll industry is the international contractor, international employee. So that's a big topic that maybe we'll get a guest on and we'll talk about that in a future episode. But I want to sort of land the plane a bit. So it's been a great episode. We talked about everything from the EEOC's sex discrimination suit of R&L Carriers, as well as some of the comp and benefit mistakes that small businesses make. Threw a little Taylor Swift in there for good measure. And if you like this episode, share it with your team, circulate it. Word of mouth is a great way to promote the show. And we also love seeing your reviews and subscriptions. So if you like this show, there's plenty more where this came from. Wherever you get your podcast, and or if you follow us on YouTube, you'll see a whole list of prior episodes. And check us out every week for new, fresh content. So, see you later.
Thanks, everyone.